Look, I'm Simon, and what we're talking about today, this isn't just some theoretical debate on the future of AI or labor. This is the raw, empirical breakdown of my own life, a literal, personal, system-level reboot. It's the story of how a completely catastrophic hardware failure forced me to evolve. And I went from a manual coder, someone who was just utterly obsessed with the friction of building things by hand, into a high-level digital architect. So I'm going to show you exactly how the systems we use to execute our ideas actually define how we see ourselves. And more importantly, what happens when that biological bridge between your mind and your hands completely collapses? I used to think using AI made you less human. Then, part of my brain died, and the machine helped me find my way back. Before all this happened, I genuinely used to think AI was just a shortcut for people who were, fundamentally afraid of real work. I had this intense, unyielding belief that relying on a machine eroded your humanity. But then, at exactly 23 years old, part of my brain died. I had a stroke. It was a severe medical crisis that completely shattered my neurological hardware. And in the dark aftermath of that crash, the very machine I despised became the exact instrument that helped me find my way back to myself.
Section 1. Worshipping the Shell. Let's look at my pre-stroke mindset.
There's this concept from the anime Ghost in the Shell that honestly perfectly captures my old, fundamental misunderstanding of identity. It's called the ghost. Basically, it's your consciousness, your intent, the undeniable core of who you are beneath the biological or digital machinery that's carrying it. But before my stroke, I was deeply, deeply confused about this. I kept confusing the ghost with the shell itself. Back in my early 20s, I had this rigid, almost religious adherence to manual game development. I was building games in Godot, completely from scratch, and I falsely believed that the friction, the struggle, the suffering, I thought that was the craft itself. I literally thought my ghost lived inside every single hour I spent brute-forcing bugs.
Pre-stroke me valued friction, manual syntax, brute-forcing bugs, and suffering. Versus post-stroke me, who values intent, systems design, high-level architecture, and translation. There's just this stark binary contrast between these two versions of myself. The old me operated on this classic philosophy-brained logic where I thought removing friction meant removing myself from the work. But post-stroke me, I was violently forced into a new reality. I had to strip away the vanity of manual labor and focus entirely on intent, high-level architecture, and translation. I had to wake up and realize that my worth wasn't tied to how much I suffered typing out syntax, but rather the clarity of the systems I could actually design in my head.
Section 2. My system crash. The stroke at 23. Turning thought into execution felt like trying to type through static. I need you to imagine the sheer horror of this disconnect. Having a stroke at 23 didn't just damage my physical movement. Yeah, okay, my left side weakened, but what terrified me to my absolute core was the continuity damage. The neurological hardware crash caused this severe, terrifying cognitive fragmentation. The crazy part? I still deeply understood systems. I still completely grasped storytelling and complex design logic. The core architecture was perfectly intact in my head, but the biological pathway to actually execute those thoughts, it had completely collapsed underneath me. Cognitive fragmentation is like reading my own mind through corrupted subtitles. This fragmentation was heavy, man. Emotionally, it was devastating. Just imagine knowing exactly what you want to say, but your brain just keeps buffering the language needed to say it. I couldn't even properly parse what I was feeling anymore. It was literally like trying to read my own mind through corrupted subtitles. My internal monologue was completely scrambled. It left me isolated inside a shell that was just fundamentally failing to translate my ghost to the outside world.
Section 3. The Neurological Prosthetic. Time for a system update.
Well, desperation leads to system updates you never thought you'd actually authorize. Late one night, just sitting in the glow of my monitor, I opened an AI chat window and I typed, "What Jungian archetype do these emotions resemble?" I just fed the machine the fragmented, broken subtitles of my internal state. Now, I didn't open it to generate code, and I definitely didn't want the AI to give me the answers to my life. I needed it to serve as a mirror. I needed an external processor to basically reflect my own scattered data back to me in a structured, readable format. This wasn't about outsourcing my humanity, right? It was about reclaiming it through a digital lens.
And that was the paradigm shift. The machine stopped feeling like an intruder and started feeling like an interface. The tool sitting on my screen stopped feeling like a threat. It stopped feeling like this invader trying to steal my craft. It became the translation layer I so desperately needed. Look, when cognition and execution stop syncing properly in your own brain, a tool that bridges that gap isn't a crutch. It's a profound neurological prosthetic that literally re-enables your intent.
Section 4. The Architecture Test. Proof of the Ghost.
But, just feeling better wasn't enough. I'm a developer. I need empirical proof. I needed a diagnostic test to confirm my mind and my judgment were still fully intact. So I purposely chose to build something I was largely unfamiliar with, just to push my logic and systems thinking to the absolute limit. I decided to architect a full, professional-grade data warehouse. We're talking star schemas for data modeling, robust ETL pipelines for data integration, fact and dimension tables for metric tracking, audit logging for system integrity, and analytical queries for professional output. Pre-stroke me would have treated manually typing every single SQL query as some sort of moral achievement, but post-stroke me, I used AI to bridge those mechanical syntax gaps.
I became the architect. The machine became the interface. I held the entire massive system architecture perfectly in my head, and the AI simply translated my structural intent into syntax. And guess what? The project worked flawlessly. Not because AI replaced me, but because it allowed me to reach parts of myself that neurological damage had essentially locked away. I stepped up and became the architect. My true value was never my typing speed, not even close. It was my judgment. I defined the relationships, I understood the flow of information, and the machine merely acted as the interface layer between my thought and the final output.
Section 5, Protecting Your Intent. Let's do a system protocol update.
Was it ever really humanity? Or was it just labor? I want to turn this logic back on you for a second. I see so much of the current AI discourse out there, and I realize that almost all of it is actually just fear about identity. We spent decades training people to tie their professional worth and their actual humanity to output friction. When a machine threatens the repetition of your daily tasks, you might feel like it's threatening you. But surviving brain damage forced me to ask an incredibly uncomfortable question. If your humanity disappears the second a tool handles your boilerplate code or helps you express yourself, was it ever really humanity? Or was it just labor?
The parts of me that survived: taste, judgment, curiosity, intent, perspective, the ghost. I can tell you exactly what survives when the biological machinery breaks down. It's those things. These are the core human traits that survived my brain damage. When AI handles the mechanical translation and fills in the syntax gaps, it absolutely doesn't erase your humanity. Honestly, often it reveals exactly what was human all along. It strips away the grueling labor and leaves only your purest intent.
You stop worshiping friction and start protecting intent. If technology is making you feel alienated right now, trust me, I understand that fear way more deeply than most. But blind optimism or total stubborn rejection, those are not your only two options. There's a third path here. You update your worldview. You stop worshiping friction. You stop pretending that suffering through tedious tasks somehow makes you a better creator. And you start protecting your intent. You elevate yourself above the machinery.
I am Siam, and this is how I rebooted. My ghost never left the machine. I finally stopped confusing the shell for the soul. The stroke took away my ability to be a manual laborer, but it forced me to become a visionary digital architect. Look at your own systems. Really evaluate what is truly your intent versus what is just friction. And ask yourself, what kind of architect are you ready to become?